The unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Today I'm going to talk about sitting still with fear. Here's a Buddha on the altar, bestowing fearlessness. That's what this mudra means. And he does this a lot, which means he knows that people have fear. Does that sound okay, or do I sound like I'm in a tin box? Oh well. It's not like a stop sign or anything, it's a gentle thing. Don't worry, it's all right. And behind the altar, we have our other Buddha, which has a double fearlessness. It's really all right. Don't have to worry. Don't be afraid. Because fear has always been with us. People have been afraid throughout time immemorial, or you wouldn't be here. Like in ancient times, if you said, oh, nice saber-toothed tiger, you might not survive. But if you say, I better run away, more likely. And even nowadays, I don't think I'll walk down that dark street. I think I will stick to the main drag and maybe get home safely. Fear does have its benefits, but we don't want to let it rule our lives. We can get completely stuck in a box of fear if we're not careful. Well, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty in our world, and it's always been the same, or it's always been like this. But at present especially, there's a lot of fear, worry, turmoil, uncertainty, and so forth. And we've always had fear. We're just little fragile beings on this little planet with this little thin skin of the planet. It's pretty insubstantial, actually, and pretty ephemeral when you think about it. Look at the stars and you see all the stuff out there. This little tiny blue planet that we live on, thinking that we're important, It's pretty impermanent. Short and uncertain life. We get sick, die, We're susceptible to fire and flood and hurricane and all these awful things, all kinds of disasters. We live next to a volcano, which could wake up, You're sleeping now, but you never know. We get sick, we die. There's a very good chance we'll all die. And there's the one thing we don't want to think about, And it's a big fear, and the people we love too, they can get sick and die. And it's very understandable. This is like one of our primordial fears that we don't really want to think about too much. And we don't think about it all the time. But as monks, actually, we think about death more than most people probably. I think it's a Christian monastic tradition where they make their coffin before they're ordained, and they sleep in it. It sounds very uncomfortable, but it would make it the point. I'm going to end up in this thing one day. Anyway. Fear of deprivation, insecurity, fear of poverty, being homeless, can happen to anybody actually, just about. Especially at the moment with all the turmoil going on. Fear for the people we love. We want them to be happy, healthy, safe from harm. That's what we want, the people we love. Especially if we have kids, we just want them to be happy and safe. Fear of losing the people we love. They might die, they might leave us, anything can happen. Not love us anymore. And those are some of the more basic fears. But then there's other fears. Fear of failure in what we're trying to do. I don't want to look like. Fear of looking like an idiot. Well, you get used to that. Fear of making a mistake. Especially a fear of making a mistake that harms other people. That, like doctors and nurses, they've always got that, I'm sure, that kind of thing. I've got to be really careful because I could really harm somebody. I could kill somebody if I get the dose wrong or whatever. It's really hard, Fear of doing something that's difficult, that we feel is a challenge. Maybe I won't. Yeah, I need to do it. Let's just do it, And then you do it. And it's liberating to actually overcome that fear, or to do what you need to do in spite of that fear. You don't have to be fearless. You just need to not let it stop you. That's the thing. Don't let it stop us from doing something that we need to do. Fear of making a leap in our life or making a change. Don't like change that much. People are afraid of change. But actually, sometimes it's just really good to make a change in our life. to do something that's difficult, challenging, and see where it takes us. Sometimes it's the very, very best thing. Sometimes it's a disaster, but then we deal with it. Fear in relationships, some fear of somebody else's anger or disappointment, feeling we can't be ourselves, that we're walking on eggshells so we don't, upset somebody, or we can't be completely truthful. Those are sort of fears that we might have in the background. And that existential fear, the nameless dread. We wake up in the night and there's this feeling of dread. And we don't know what it is, we don't know why we're afraid. I'm not the only person who has this, because other people say, oh yes, existential dread, yes, I know. So, just worried and afraid and you don't know why. But I think it's just because we're human beings. It's part of our condition that we have fear. But we don't have to let it run our life, as I said. Other kinds of fears. Fear of heights, spiders, being in an enclosed space, all kinds of things. We don't have to feel bad about them. We can tend to feel ashamed of our fear. I shouldn't be afraid. This is silly to be afraid of spiders. But actually, sometimes they can be poisonous. Or a fear of heights. Well, you could fall off a cliff, It's not completely useless fear. And we might try to pretend we're not afraid of anything. I'm courageous and I'm strong and I mustn't show any fear, never let them see you sweat kind of thing. Well, we're still afraid. And to pretend we're not to ourselves, we might have to look good. Whenever I feel afraid, I hold my head erect. I whistle a happy tune, so no one will suspect I'm afraid. I show my age. This is an ancient, ancient movie. But to admit to ourselves that we're afraid, we don't need to be ashamed of fear, because everybody has fear, actually. To accept it. Yes, I'm worried and afraid. Worried about what might happen, afraid of something, afraid of a person, all kinds of things. To admit that we're afraid, then we can do something. Because if we won't admit to fear, we can't do anything about it. Because I'm not afraid, I'm fine, Doesn't help. Everybody has fear. It's normal. And we need to accept our fears and to have compassion for them. This is the thing, to have compassion for our fears, inadequacies, worries, anxieties, and all that. Because compassion is a great antidote to fear. Compassion for ourselves, compassion for others, because other people are afraid as well. Everybody has fear, no matter how strong and invulnerable they may look. Everybody has fear. We're all fragile little beings. We're all vulnerable. We're all prone to old age, sickness, and death, no matter who we are. Everybody is in that boat. We all have suffering. So there's really no room for hatred or judgment when you think about it. How could we hate somebody who eventually will get old, sick, and die just like me? Well, fear constricts us. It makes us selfish. Me against the world, or me and the people I love against the world, or me and my community against the world, or me and my country against the world, or me and my planet against everybody else. Just always me at the middle, in the beginning, in the middle of it. Me at the center of it all. Greed, anger, and delusion, the three poisons. Delusion or ignorance, the three poisons that create suffering. And they're all tied up with fear when you think about it. When we're angry, usually there's fear there, fear underneath. If we're angry, often it's because we're afraid of something. I'd hit them before they hit you, kind of thing. Or just defensiveness. It's because we're afraid. And the same goes for other people too. If they're angry, it's often because they're afraid. So perhaps you can have a little compassion for somebody who's angry, to remember that they're afraid of something. It kind of brings it all down a little bit, makes it a bit more manageable. If this person who's raging at me is afraid, maybe I don't have to be so much afraid of them as I was. Maybe I can have a little compassion, even a little kindness towards that being who's angry, upset, and seems, really frightening. When we're grasping at something, greed, anger, and delusion, greed, grasping at something, wanting more than we need, it's because we're afraid of not having it, Or maybe we're afraid of not, we want more because we don't have enough. We think we don't have enough. Afraid of being deprived. And even people who seem to have everything and want more and more, they're afraid. Of course they're afraid. They're afraid of not having everything they might want, I need another yacht, I'm afraid I might not get one. And it seems ridiculous. And of course it's selfish and it can cause terrible harm. But if you can remember that there's fear underneath that, it can help us find a little bit of compassion for that. Because it seems so awful to sort of want something at the expense of other people. But it's so much like that, in this human world. So many of us actually, even in small ways, might want something at the expense of somebody else. And to have compassion when we remember that somebody who does terrible harm isn't an evil person. It's probably because they're afraid and they're deluded. The other thing, delusion or ignorance. Because when we're afraid, we're usually not seeing clearly. We don't see what's really going on. We don't see how we create harm. And they don't either. We're just seeing from our own perspective. And fear makes us selfish. So that's why we want to do something about it. We don't want to act from selfishness and create harm. So how do we apply the teachings of the Buddha when we're afraid? We do our best to sit still. Of all things, to sit still in the midst of it. When fear arises, to recognize that it's there. We might get kind of carried off by it and not realize that actually, I'm just scared here. What am I doing? But to think, I'm afraid, I'm worried, I'm anxious. Okay, accept it, not judging it. I'm afraid. This is normal, this is human, it's all right. But not to feed it with worry or try to push it away. And without completely believing in it. It's so easy to think, because I'm afraid and there must be something to be afraid of. It's not always the case. Sometimes our fear is just irrational, We might be afraid of something that'll never happen, even couldn't possibly happen. And if it does happen, usually we just deal with it as best we can and we stop being afraid of it because it's happened. So why worry, if you see what I mean. And when a big thing happens, some horrible big thing, we forget about the little things that we were all worried about. We have a different perspective. Our house burns down. Oh, thank God nobody died, It's just, it puts things in perspective when something big happens. When we see fear or worry come up in our mind, as I said, first we need to be aware that it's there and not just get caught up in it, run down the road with it. Sitting in meditation, just sit in the midst of it. I'm sitting in meditation and worry arises or fear arises. Don't feed it with the mind and make a whole story out of it. Just sit there with it and feel it in the body, because actually fear is felt in the body, like anger and other things. Don't feed it with the mind, just let it be there in the body and accept it. Don't feed it, and it'll dissolve. It can't last forever because it's actually empty. There is no real, it's not the reality. Our fear is not the reality. The horrible thing isn't happening at the moment, probably. And if it is, I'm dealing with it. But usually, we're worried about things that might happen. Things that maybe even they'll probably happen. And maybe they do happen, but usually not in quite the way we expect. Usually it's different. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. But we just deal with things. But right now, we're just sitting here. And we don't have to feed our fear. Just to sit there and to see how it comes and goes. It doesn't sit there like a lump forever. It actually comes and goes. It may arise and then pass away, arise, pass away. And that's so helpful to see that actually it's not a substantial thing. It's just fear. It's just a feeling. And often it's not based on anything very real, as I said. We can sit still, right here, right now. And at another time when we're not sitting in meditation, we can look at all the things we're afraid of. We can make a list, all the things I'm afraid of, whether little things or big things, not in any particular order. And it can help put things in perspective again. Oh, I'm afraid of that. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Oh, yes, I'm rather afraid of that, Some of our fears may be clearly unfounded, and some might seem more realistic, but they're still not the reality, actually. It's just fear, And as I said, the things we fear actually do happen, and then we'll just deal with them. Somehow we do. Even sickness and death. One day we'll die. And that's the greatest letting go. And it can be really scary. And maybe there's nothing to fear in that. People have been dying for millions of years. And people who've had a near-death experience often say, now I have no need to be afraid of death. I'll never be afraid of death again. Because they've been so close, and they know there's nothing to fear. How comforting, how wonderful. We don't have to worry. It's because we don't know. It's the not knowing that makes us afraid. We're afraid of things we don't know. And in death, we have no control over anything. We just have to go with it, But what we do have control over is what we do in this lifetime, how we live our life now. And the more we can live a good, a virtuous life, helping beings and not just living for ourselves, or the more peace we will have when that time comes to die. So we don't talk about death all the time, but now and then it comes up. Compassion and kindness, a great antidote to fear, as I said. I remember that when the COVID pandemic was at its height, our dear Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, who you may remember, he said, if you feel overwhelmed by fear, reach out to those around you. See how you can help. Because people were so afraid of getting sick, people are afraid of being with other people, that everybody really scared. And he said this really kind thing. If you feel overwhelmed by fear, reach out to those around you. See how you can help. Because he knew that this helps to dissolve that fear. It helps us to overcome it, dissolve that little shell of self, Thinking of others, not just thinking of ourselves, not just our own fear. Wonderful advice. This transfer of merit ceremony we just did is an offering of merit to other beings, and to ourselves as well, because we need merit also. But offering that merit to other beings is a wonderful way of helping to overcome our fear of people and our fear for people. Fear for the people we love, fear for ourselves, and fear of those who may be other, Well, they're not really other, actually. We're all in the same boat. It just seems like they're other. But if we can have a little compassion and remember that they probably have fear too. They almost certainly have. If they're human beings, they almost certainly have fear. So we can just offer merit, offer compassion. And that helps us to dissolve our little tight shell of self, our little selfishness, little sort of me and against the world. It helps dissolve that, because in fact, we aren't separate, we just think we are. So if somebody frightens us, can we try to find a little compassion for that person? Just to see if they're frightening, maybe they're probably afraid. If they're angry or they're bullying or whatever, they're probably afraid. Most people who are like that are not terribly happy people, People who are greedy and selfish, they're probably afraid and not very happy, again, because they can't be contented. They always want more. Sometimes we're called to do something that frightens us because we know it's good to do what's right when other people want us to do something different, to risk losing something for the sake of integrity and honesty, to stand up and be counted, as it were, to keep to the precepts when you know it's difficult. That can be really hard. It can take a lot of courage, but that is a way of going beyond our fear, not just doing the convenient, safe thing, but thinking, no, I can't do that. I'm sorry. I have to do something different. But not in a hard-nosed kind of a I'm right way, but just saying, I have to do it differently, kindly and compassionately, Because peace of heart is worth a whole lot more than expedience and having the safe life. And often things turn out for the best anyway. In the end, often they do. There's a saying in Buddhism, the Dharma protects the Dharma practicer. So if you practice the Dharma in the midst of fear, going to our true refuge, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, sitting still beneath the waves of change and uncertainty and all that, entrusting ourselves to the three treasures of Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. They will protect us. The refuge of the Buddha, Buddha nature. We're all within that. We're all part of Buddha nature. None of us is separate for a moment. And we might as well accept it and do our best to act in accord with it and live by that as best we can, entrusting ourselves to that true nature, that within us which knows what's good to do. In the midst of all conditions, all situations, all our fear and all that, trusting that something within us knows what's good to do, and following that, no matter where it takes us, in faith that things will work out for the best if we just do what's right, And we can be wrong, but to do our best to do what's right. The refuge of the Dharma, which shows us how to sit still in the midst of all fear. So many of the teachings of the Buddha help us in so many ways, and sitting still with fear, or with anger, or grief, or despair, or all those things that come up, sitting still in the midst of all of it. The refuge of the Sangha, those who follow the way of the Buddha. Here we are, And when you're here just for a weekend, having seen us before, we may never see you again. Here for this weekend, you're part of the Sangha. You're here, you're following the teachings of the Buddha, seeing if it works for you, and if it does, great. And we help each other, It's not just the monks helping the lay people, or it's the lay people help the monks and each other. We all help each other. None of us is especially wise and profound. We're all just trying to do our best. And we all learn from each other. Sometimes we learn from somebody what's not a good idea to do. And sometimes, a lot of it, we just learn from somebody else's modest little example. Just, oh, look what they're doing. I'll try that. I think I'll do that. I would like to be like that person, To see with a long view beyond the ups and downs of our immediate circumstances, the ups and downs of life and uncertainty, to remain still beneath all the waves of change, because everything changes. Impermanence can work in our favor. Things go up and down, sometimes they settle out, sometimes they go up and down in a different way. But to sit still beneath all that as best we can, and simply trust. This is the practice of faith and trust. Trusting in that which is greater than we are, Buddha nature, whatever you want to call it, which sustains us and sustains all beings. We're all part of that. We keep turning towards it and trusting ourselves to it in the midst of all the things of our lives, fear, uncertainty, good times and bad, ups and downs. Just remain still as best we can amidst all of it, because we're all part of Buddha nature, the great matter. And that's our talk for the day.